Résumé in rhyme. Education adieu. Upon commencement from a southern college, where I pursued for years a higher knowledge of art and other subjects I enjoyed, without a care for how I'd be employed, my parents set aside a schooling fund, and thus I could afford to learn for fun. I suffered quite a rude awakening. My lightsome life became a heavy thing. The days I spent in making pretty pictures abruptly wholly filled with physical pressures, while since I felt that art is of the soul, too fine a good for being bought or sold, what little skill I had was not applied to earning needed money. I survived through months without a clue of what to do, because my sister helped me pay my dues. Telemarketing blues. Eventually I ended up in sales, where winter hours passed as slow as snails, while I sat in a basement with a view of a crow-filled leafless graveyard, adding to a sinking feeling with each pitch I gave about the Boston Globe in front of graves, depressed and feeling that my life was through, as I despaired about what I could do. My boss eavesdropped on my calls for the Globe through some device he'd stuck to his earlobe, and overheard me looking for a job. Outside of work, beneath a tree, I'd sob, because existence struck me like a rock, and all I felt I had was 5 o'clock. Negative developments. Since I had studied print photography, the first thought that occurred to me was to apply for working as the staff for some store that would make a photograph from every negative that people brought, for pictures in those long-gone days were bought, not stored in phones or other sleek devices, before such things as selfies turned to vices. I scored a job in which my daily role was turning rolls of film the boss would dole to negatives through which I'd shine a light for making color prints or black and white. I'd later see this as a metaphor, that life, though it looks negative, yields more when light is shined through it as for a print. But after working I would have to squint, because I spent the day in sunless darkness, and this combined with my depression's starkness left me depleted, totally exhausted, as if by muggers I had been accosted. So often I would ask to leave, too tired, and not surprisingly, I soon was fired. My boss was nice and tried to get me help, because he knew that I was in deep hell. But I declined, since recently I'd been committed 1 week to a loony bin, when counselors in whom I had confided thought I might kill myself, and so decided to have a cop detain me as I left, and took my freedom as a safety theft. The Courier. Back in the year of 1986, which in tenacious recollection sticks, it wasn't hard for me to find some work, although my mind and mood had gone berserk. So on the morning that I had been fired, I walked around and shortly afterward was hired in Boston by a chain of photo labs nestled in the midst of concrete slabs. The pay was peanuts as it was before. The minimum in those days was just 4. But that sufficed because my rent was low. An elderly sweet landlord kept it so. By day-long darkness I was not enveloped, as by machines the photos were developed. So I just pressed some buttons while it spat. Though that beat working in the dark all day, my restlessness was hard to keep at bay, because I felt that I had lost my soul, and that was on my mind with each film roll. But then I took their job as courier, so I could spend the day as worrier. Paid to pace the town and ride the train, consorting with the tumult in my brain, without the need to be confined indoors, but taking rolls of film between the stores. For half a year I roamed like this the town, not just in slight despondence, but way down. Handouts. While carrying some film through Harvard Square, distressed without much energy to spare, I saw a woman passing out some sheets to passers-by for hours on the streets. And somehow, in a way I can't remember, I had immense good fortune, and I met her. And we began to talk of things we think, her artwork and my drawings done in ink. And so when I had felt all hope was gone, I found an awesome friend raised in Iran. And though in public I had been a crier, I joined the firm and handed out each flyer to passers-by, although the pay was low, and though monotony made days feel slow. It happened then that my depression ended, through dreams in which my ailing mind was mended. They had to do with Christmas in the spring, not on the calendar, but in my being. And while he didn't know what I went through, a co-worker, although he was a Jew, said, "Merry Christmas, man, for you." I don't know why I said that, but wish to. A while more I'd pass each ad-filled flyer, but soon sought more to which I could aspire. El Mundo. As I recovered from a year of hell, without much of a working skill to sell, and deep depression for a time would vanish, I sought employment where I could use Spanish, because I felt my mother tongue helped me think through a different language differently. English was the language of the thoughts that filled me with despairing. Polyglots are fortunate with many they can choose. I started working for a Spanish newspaper, where I got a raise in dues, from 4 to 5, which then seemed like a lot, although it still was peanuts what I got. I spent a lot of time there in the dark, yet as my mood was then no longer stark, the hours were not difficult to bear, and sunlight streamed in basement windows there. Run by a family from Ecuador, my job was entertaining, not a bore, because my mood had gone from hell to heaven, and they had brought a child who was 7, who on his breaks from school would be around. He made the place where I was daily bound delightful with his kid imagination. He said that in a former incarnation we had been friends as now again we were, with the same girlfriends, his much prettier. In fact, then, at the age of 23, I loved my life's first girlfriend crazily. Of that long job and all the work I did, I most remember fun with that great kid. I used the primitive technology, developing the photos that would be used in the paper published every week. But after 1 year felt that I should seek more fruitful work while life began to bud, because I was disturbed by all the blood, the news of murders that were focused on, in which each victim was a helpless pawn. My boss said, "Red News always sold more papers." But I felt that their stories could be shapers of people's outlooks, poisoning their views, and so I quit the outlet for such news. The hotline. To have more time for writing poetry and spend my days with flexibility, not having to be chained from 9 to 5, a lion's share of hours of being alive, I chose to start a business of my own and put up advertisements with my phone for people needing someone who would type their college papers in which thoughts were ripe on lots of subjects, so I got to learn of many topics while I'd also earn. My first was a thesis for a PhD, sought by a student of art therapy, a topic that was near then to my heart, for I too saw great therapy in art. My fee was by the page. I made enough for paying rent and other needed stuff, but hours spent were more than I expected, because of all the grammar I corrected, mistakes of English made by foreign speakers or poorly educated native seekers, of typing services that I'd provide without a charge for fixes I supplied, because I lacked the heart for charging more to students who were deep in debt or poor, in years before computers were widespread, and I could learn from what I typed and read. Although my hotline was a neat success, where I could be my own boss without stress, more steady jobs grew difficult to spurn, as I soon had to find new ways to earn. Temp smorgasbord. To supplement the income that I got, times when my typing hotline wasn't hot, I joined some agencies who'd fill the rut with jobs for me from which they'd take a cut. The jobs I got were awful, yet okay, as they were temporary, some a day, though others dragged for months, a horrid bore, till I just couldn't take them anymore. On one such job I did some data entry, in which each hour seemed to last a century. I entered washing machine serial numbers, and grew each passing hour number and number. And yet I managed as my mood was good, so jobs like that back then could be withstood. Though looking back at how I was employed, it seems such work's more suited to a droid. It helped I was in love, though I didn't elope, while at a job of stuffing envelopes, a job that now might be done by machines, or low-paid starting workers in their teens. In one I moved some desks from dawn to dusk, yet didn't feel then like a hollowed husk, because back in my 20s such a chore was exercise that I could be paid for. I emptied boxes full of children's toys, and witnessed how man's industry employs an endless stream of plastic where we're drowning, a part of why the green of earth is browning. And being part of this was hard to bear, while I pulled from a box each teddy bear. Earth's devastation there appeared so big, but I left when I found a steady gig. The Helper. Aflame with love for Christ of whom I dreamed, so that I felt my soul had been redeemed, I wished to serve and called an agency that worked to find help for the elderly. I went to homes of people who were old and helped them clean or do as I was told, to aid them in some other way as needed, since youthful ease had long ago receded. One told me it was no job for a man. That didn't bother me or change my plan. And of the jobs I'd had till that time, it was, I'd have to say, my favorite, because it gave me meaning, not just money, and that made cold gray winters feel more sunny. But I saw things that left me saddened too. A man disabled by a sudden stroke who had magazines with youthful buxom boobs, contrasting with his old flesh pinched by tubes. And one man without legs who gave his wealth to someone he thought loved him while in health, but who neglected him while his landlord cared for him like someone she adored. A sweet old woman like an angel sent to make up for the woman who had spent the wealth that no one in the end can keep. One man who always thanked me, thanks a heap, stayed in my memory till decades later I'd try to help in some way that was greater. Repo Man. When I had passed the age of 25, I hadn't owned a car or learned to drive, because I didn't want one, didn't care, as they were harming earth, polluting air. In Boston, carlessness was not a strain, as almost anywhere I'd take a train. So I thought it was funny that I got work taking cars from people who had not made payments for them as they were required. It was by some detectives I was hired to type reports about their spying on car drivers waiting till they all were gone and left their cars on public property where they were repossessed then secretly. My back was to the entrance, and I got lucky that I wasn't ever shot by people who were mad their cars were towed because of all the payments that they owed. But workers in a bank that lent the loot weren't lucky. Someone did go in and shoot. I worked a couple of years at that grim job, transcribing tales of agents who would rob the cars of people who had not paid for those wheels, perhaps because they were too poor. Then swiftly, many more were strapped for cash, because the weak economy would crash, and no one could buy cars as banks would scoff at people penniless. I was laid off. The Hunter. With not too many working skills to sell, my unemployment lasted for a spell of 1 year while the global markets tanked, and all the little money that I banked was unemployment checks that I was sent which barely gave enough for paying rent. My sister and her beau shared that expense, and though it wasn't much, it was immense. To me, in that whole year I didn't earn. I moved to Florida but would return, when I found out that there was even worse, and that to Florida I was averse. I'd tagged along, my sister and her beau wished to live by the sea, I chose to go, as Boston prospects waned, and since I'd be close to the eldest of my family. My grandfather and grandmother I loved, and would be near since joblessness had shoved me from the northern state that I'd been in to Florida, where new life would begin. We settled near where rockets blasted off, propelled by flames the big engines would cough, and even saw a shuttle launch at night, reflecting on the sea a shaft of light. But we lived in a small town on the coast, where jobs were even scarcer than in most depressed parts of the country, and what's worse, I didn't have a car, which was a curse. In Florida, without a bus or train, I had to ride my bike through sun or rain, vast distances of highways that were flat, and I grew to dislike where I was at, and pined nostalgically for Massachusetts, its hills and seasons, till I'd finally choose it as home where I would sink deep roots and stay, recalling my return as joyful day. The Guru. A jobless year instilled in me resolve to add some needed job skills that would solve my problems finding work, but also be related loosely to my school degree. I chose computer graphics and began to study on my own without a plan, except for that of building slowly skills, so I'd get better jobs to pay my bills and have some fun with work that I enjoyed, in which my skills in art would be employed. I called myself the graphics guru then, and with new skills, in Boston once again, set out to find some work through agencies, with temporary jobs. I hoped through these, my skills would grow till finally I could get some great job, or one at least half good. The first had nothing to do with anything graphic. It had to do instead with cars and traffic. The processing of tickets with the help of big machines. That job would have been hell, but with co-workers I would have a blast in chatting so the hours wouldn't last as long. Although the job was tedious, the chats made it appear less so to us. While answering the phone I would disguise my voice with funny accents I'd devise. Thus weeks, then months of working hours flew, till it was time to go before I knew. I stayed for 6 months at that chat-filled gig, as my small graphic skills grew slowly big. Cambridge Neuroscience. Through temp work I built up my resume, so it included new skills that would pay, more than I'd made before by quite a bit. Computer graphics was the ticket. It enabled me to get some bigger checks, and work became a blessing, not a hex. Because I got to use my mind much more, so job tasks that had been a drudge-filled bore got interesting, or less monotonous. The jobs a droid can do aren't meant for us. To pay the rent and needed things I bought, I didn't want to slave like some robot. So learning new skills wasn't only fun, it meant that I could feel like less of one, and even turn the hours spent in labor to moments I could sometimes also savor. As graphics guru, which I had become, in little time a job offer would come, from somewhere that I had been temping at, and I was perfectly delighted that the place was one I liked, a biotech, developing a drug to stop the wreck that's caused by strokes or by head injuries. So I felt part of something that would ease the suffering of others. It felt great to work for them because I could relate to that important mission. Though they were in business for the loot, not just a cure, the mixing of the motives was excused because what they developed would be used to help. So it was just and fitting that from this we could also make a living. A biotech that focused on the brain was fun to work for rather than a strain, because I got to chat with everyone and sometimes even learn while having fun. and make some friends I'd keep, I hope, for life. One buddy helped me meet my future wife by coming with me as a helpful spy, so I would ask her out and not be shy. Unlike some bosses I had in the past, my boss was cool, relaxed. I had a blast in making graphics for the company of scientific interest to me, like drawings of receptors on a cell to show effects of drugs they hope to sell. I made some lasting friends of scientists and had mind-blowing talks in office trysts of consciousness, cosmology, and depth, philosophies regarding life and death. For scientists conducting their research, I made big posters showing how the search for efficacious drugs was turning out, but test results would in the end cast doubt on one that they were banking on, the drug that didn't work as hoped, which meant the rug was pulled from under all of us so that we lost our jobs for a drug called Saristat. Severance. When I was laid off from the biotech, I didn't face a swift financial wreck because they gave us severance, ample pay that lasted 3 months from the layoff day, and helped us with a better resume. Besides, 4 years of work had helped me build a savings stash so that the days weren't filled with worries over how I'd make the rent, though months of joblessness could make a dent. That dent was not as awful as before, because I wasn't single anymore. My wife could not provide financially, as she was student then of pharmacy, but we lived in her parents' condo, so we didn't need to cough up too much dough for housing, and I saw the perfect chance for working independently, freelance. My business then was fairly lucrative. It gave at least the needed loot to live, and I became a contractor who'd bounce around with cares that barely weighed an ounce, because I was in love then with my wife, and work was just a sliver of my life. I got a long-term gig beside the sea at another drug development company, where walls were made of glass so I could see the seagulls fly around me through the day. It was a gorgeous place for earning pay. But its main drug did not work out as hoped, so I was canned again, but never moped, or sat around at home a mossy slob, but found a full-time gig, a steady job. It seemed the thing that I should do, and yet one should be careful with the job they get, for this was at a corporate hellhole, where at the door you'd have to leave your soul, and work without a window in a cave. It wasn't worth the money that I'd save. You'd have to chart how you spent every second. I quickly left, although I never reckoned my greatest job was yet to come, and it would be a chance I missed had I not quit. BC. A century had set, a new one dawned, a new millennium, and from our bond of love my wife and I had formed a bun that baked within her and would soon be done. And that gave me a sense of urgency to have a steady job so we would be prepared for her arrival in the summer. To lack insurance would have been a bummer, because the fee was much more than $1. 12,000 for the hospital. We'd holler, not just from pangs of birth, but from the pang of feeling we'd been robbed as by a gang, compared to countries where the cost is free, since universal care would pay the fee. It's true the money would come from a tax, but we'd not have to worry when an axe had cut our jobs so we would lose our care. But luckily we were a covered pair, because I got a job before the day of birth, for which we didn't have to pay. The job was in a university, and one of wonderful longevity, for as I write this I'm still working there, now almost 20 years, a job that's rare. Not just in length, but other ways as well. The furthest one can get from corporate hell. And one that for a lucky person fits, because it offers splendid benefits. A month of paid vacation being one. Others weren't expected, but have done a lot to make me like the place long term. As ideal place for me, a big bookworm. A place where I can get far more than wages from giant libraries whose volume pages are free to keep a year and then renew, and there are perks of which I never knew, till I would make good usage of them later, which made the benefits appear then greater. Like learning to play piano, I could go to practice in their piano studio, a place where I have played on lunch breaks often, since playing music I have found can soften the hard part of a job, the drudgery of staring at computers constantly. That too was not as it could be, when I got my own office and could see big trees outside each office window pane, which made screen staring much less of a pain. The job had started out monotonous, with endless tables, but I didn't fuss, and there has been a great variety of interesting tasks assigned to me, like illustrating, animating, making videos, for training, books, and presentation shows. I've loved to use my head to automate, to spare us sometimes from the dismal fate of repetitious processes that we could delegate to our machinery. So schools around the world can be their best. The center where I work designs a test for math at different levels, more for science, and reading for results of great reliance, used by countries seeking to improve in ways that reams of test data can prove, will probably be helpful, so we aid in education through the tests we've made. The purpose of the center isn't profit, although for years I've made my living off it, and that to me has had a great appeal, as its important mission makes me feel my labor helps to make a better world. My labor helps to make a better world as better learning systems are unfurled. For years the job has lasted like a boulder, washed by waves that hit me, growing older, enduring through the times that life has changed, as when my wife and I became estranged, and single fatherhood became my life, and sharing custody with my ex-wife. My job, the boulder, struck by crashing water, enabled me for years to raise my daughter, by all financial pressures unconcerned, providing her our home with what I earned. At first it helped to in another way, because the college also had pre-K, hardly more than 1 block away, so I could pick her up on my lunch break and bring her to my office where we'd make drawings or have other fun together. Always a delight to go and get her. My job, that boulder firm beside the sea, endured through health and then infirmity, anxiety attacks, depression, OCD, a flutter so my heart needed a shock to get back into rhythm, and the rock remained. I'm thankful for my boss who'd walk around the campus with me when my nerves were shattered into restlessness. The curves I faced on life's steep road had left me frazzled, without a gorgeous summit view that dazzled. And there were points from which the plunge was steep, and discombobulated, I couldn't sleep. Severe insomnia took an awful toll, till it seemed I was bound to lose my role as graphic specialist that I had kept, that looked impossible when I'd not slept. The ailments that afflicted me were treated, and I have fought them too, and some retreated, like waves that hit the shore and then recede, though new ones hit the coast with height and speed. I know, despite how long the rock has lasted, a wave may come by which it could be blasted. But I keep building on it, though unsure how long it will, like anything, endure. In 20 years of working at the center, I've seen a lot of new co-workers enter, then leave and take their luggages of skills, and I have joked I'm older than the hills when introduced in settings that are cordial, because I'm one of few who is primordial in having been there since the early days that now are dimming in an eon's haze. My co-workers, too many to hear name, have sometimes made the job seem like a game. Delightful, not a pill. I thank them all, from A to Z, but starting off with Paul, and Joe, and Sue, Stephen, and Ruth Ann, Carrie, Erin, Bethany, and Ann. More names than in my memory can stick. Fawny, Andy, Christian, Ina, Mick. I'd like to list them all, though they be many. Yeva, Deborah, Catherine, Litwin, Yenny. Yet still I feel a faux pas is committed, because of all the names I have omitted. For all unmentioned I am grateful to, and say that it's been great to work with you. When finally leaving, I may shed a tear, though work I've most loved is as volunteer. Volunteering. Back in my 20s, filled with love of Christ, I volunteered because I felt enticed to bring that love to people suffering through reading poetry and offering the beauty found in poetry that rhymes to people elderly, far past their primes, confined within a nursing home, a fate they had to face as memories would fade. It was a good experience, and yet 30 years would pass before I'd get another job as volunteer. That taste made me feel that my life had gone to waste, because there was much more I could have done had I not carried self-absorption's ton. I raised a daughter nearly by myself, but most of life had come from some bookshelf, and I lived in my mind more than the world, as if a bud curled up and not unfurled. It dawned on me that we're each like a leaf, collecting light no matter our belief, and we're most happy when we feed the tree of life and of our shared humanity. And no one says a leaf is nice and good because it feeds its tree that's made of wood. It's simply doing what it was made for. I wish that I had known this truth before. I'm nothing by myself without the tree. I feel my best work has been done for free, because we make much more than when we're paid. When like a light collecting leaf we aid the tree on which we bloom to thrive and grow, with help we give as amateur or pro. As I was having trouble with my health, I sought a way that I could be of help, and shed self-centeredness to which I'm prone when ailments make me weary, make me groan. And in that time of anxiousness and fears, a friend I'd known for nearly 30 years suggested one good way I could contribute was making sandwiches I would distribute to homeless people wandering the city. Although my hometown Boston may be pretty, there are many here who suffer homelessness, as the rich make more and the rest make less and less. The sandwiches I made at first were 7, a number chosen since it rhymes with heaven, as I wished to bring heaven down to earth, reminding strangers that their lives had worth, although they had no place to call their own, although with frequency they were alone. So as I made each sandwich I would pray, may someone taste some love in this today. When I had finished giving out my stash, along with maybe just a little cash, I heard a song play on the radio that seemed to me to be so apropos. Ooh, baby, do you know what that's worth? You make heaven a place on earth. I'd photographed the beauties to be seen in Boston walks and added this routine at times when I went for a city stroll, and feeding others I would feed my soul. But ailments plaguing me grew more severe, heart flutters and anxiety fueled fear, like fear of hell with which I was engrossed. Religious OCD was diagnosed, but though it seemed that I might work no more, soon I'd have not one new job but 4. For 2 years I'd been singing in the choir, but scrupulosity had grown so dire that it was triggered painfully in church, propelling me to institute a search for some way to replace the church, a task in which I'd simply do what Jesus asked, not genuflect or sit down on a pew, religious iconography in view, but feed the hungry, visiting the sick. I'd heard the clock in me go tick, tock, tick, and while I was still able, hoped I could do something with my life that would be good. A friend who had for some time been my neighbor recommended then a place of labor. Assisted living for the elderly was offered at a place a mile from me, and I began my volunteering there. On Sunday mornings it became the air of church that I attended in that slot of weekend time. I wished to give a shot to bringing music, poetry, and cheer to somewhere full of pain, despair, and fear. When I began, my sleeplessness was brutal, and treatments made it worse or had been futile. And anxiousness at times would make me weak. The job, though, was the highlight of each week. As if through care of others I could bring light to theirs and my own suffering. I didn't play the piano as a kid, but learned much later, and I'm glad I did. Not just for joy it's brought me, which is big, but joy I could bring in a weekly gig. My dog, though never trained in therapy, has come for several years there now with me, and sits agreeably on people's laps, or comfortably beside them taking naps. And he has brought great fun to residents, relief as well for woes that are intense. I'd taken acting classes which helped me in telling stories entertainingly, with rhymes that made the residents and staff crack a smile or burst out in a laugh. In youth, I dreamed of teaching poetry, and almost every subject interests me. So for whatever subject I would teach, I'd bring delight of learning them to each. The one exception might be economics, though even that could be some fun as comics. Although the teacher dream has not come true, there's some related thing that I could do. As volunteer for where I work, BC, I read to kids in elementary schools near my office during some lunch breaks, and it's been wonderful for years and makes my day each time I read the rhyming stories I've found in libraries, which are like quarries, full of jewels glittering with rhyme, and I regard myself as blessed that I'm employed somewhere where I can often share such stories in lunch breaks with time to spare. The children are delightful and engaged as I act out the stories as though staged, and raise their hands for questions that I'm asking about the rhyming stories I'm enacting. My daughter isn't little like before. I'm glad to kids in schools I can read more. Like all the volunteering I have done, for me it's been enriching, even fun, and not what could be called a sacrifice of time or energy from someone nice. A red cell in the bloodstream isn't called nice for all the oxygen it's hauled from lungs to other cells within the body, as that's its mission, and it would feel shoddy if it had sense and couldn't do its part in bringing what it has sent by the heart. And that's the way I've come to see myself, within life's body like a bloodstream cell. But I've been blind to this identity, when self-absorbed in things afflicting me. On one such day, when vision had declined, I saw a woman smiling who was blind, and I sensed she then saw what I could not. And shortly afterward I had the thought, we see ourselves as separate and apart, but sometimes see that we are all a part, within a larger whole. It's not with eyes that we see this, but when we exercise a sense beyond our sense of separateness, by doing things for others which express that we're not separate as we seem to be, but one within a whole that we can't see. To exercise my feeble oneness vision and counteract a sense of sad division, I volunteered for helping someone blind to do their groceries. No weekly grind. I take it as a privilege I'm able to help her put some good food on her table. As volunteer for her I had been paired by the Mass Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired. To them I owe this opportunity to be of help as I have wished to be. Another group in Boston I discovered that's been of help for me as I've recovered from OCD related to religion was Common Cathedral, aiding in revision of life that had been centered in my head to trying to be of some small help instead. The church is not of stone. The people meet in shelters for the homeless or the street. Its pastors minister to all in need regardless of a person's place or creed. The pastor, Laura, sent me to McGinnis, a respite home with healing patients in this facility for care of homeless people, as sacred as a church, though with no steeple. I've started there as what is called a PAL, a patient activity leader for guys and gals to do things as with music or with art. With just a couple months now since my start, I've seen it will be challenging, yet hope the work I do there will help people cope with situations that are awfully hard, in a nation rich in loot but poor in heart, where often people live from check to check, and trouble with your health can cause a wreck that makes you end up homeless on the street. A volunteer job I felt was a treat was just a day of helping build a home, installing walls and insulating foam, with Boston's Habitat for Humanity, which made a power tool wielding man of me. In my life, happiness has only entered when I've expelled my urge to be self-centered. So volunteering hasn't been a chore, and I hope through the years I can do more.